Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Really appreciate you guys coming here. I know it's been a couple months since I have uploaded any videos, but due to work and moving and a lot of things happening, it's been a little bit hard to keep up with the videos. But I do have planned a couple videos, including this one, that I want to share some stuff that I've been getting asked a lot, and also some new stuff that I'm learning as well that I want to share with you guys as well. But let's get right into today's video. I've been getting asked in some of my peeps and some of the students at Brainstorm about how I use render passes, especially in my paintings and from Blender, which is the software that I use the most for my 3D. And that's what I want to talk about today. And as you can see here, this is an image that I'm working on for a course that I'm doing, and part of this course is the whole thing about render passes, and I want to take a couple minutes just to show you guys how I use them and how to get them and what they are, and everything related to render passes. So this image that I'm working on, this is actually the raw render from Blender that I got, and from here we take it to here. But what I want to show you is first how to get the render passes. And actually, what are render passes? And if you don't know, render passes are pretty much the way I look at them is like different layers that give you different types of information about your scene, right? So this is my scene right here that I use to render to get to work on this painting here. And as you can see down here, this is how I set up all the buildings and ruins and all this. And again, this is part of a big course that I'm creating on how to create 3D kits. And you can see here, this is part of the 3D kit. And in the course, I'm gonna show you like how to do everything here in Blender, how to get all these detail, the texturing, how to create bigger assets from your normal basic assets, and how to create other assets and combine them and create little scenes and bigger scenes and that sort of thing. And so this is the actual scene here. This is my shot up here. And so render passes in Blender, and you can get render passes from any other 3D software, but in Blender, if you go here to the fourth icon here, which says view layer properties here, you're gonna see a little option here for passes. That's gonna be your render passes, and as you can see, I have some of them checked here, and these are the ones that I normally use the most depending on my scene. Sometimes I don't use certain ones, but for the most part, these are the ones that I personally use the most. And again, render passes are gonna give you different types of information about your scene that are very useful when you use them for either post-production work, when you're compositing things, or I personally use them for my painting and getting certain effects and things that I need to create my painting. And so these are very useful. They save a lot of time, and I definitely recommend to get them every time you create renders from your 3D software. And it doesn't take a long time to get them. You just need to set them up, and you will get them on your file. Okay, so that's how I see render passes, and I'm gonna show you some examples of what they look like. So for example, here up here, this is gonna be my normal render here. This is my beauty render, which has everything, my lighting, textures, and everything here, atmosphere. Now, if you can see here, there's the list of render passes that right now in Eevee, I'm using Eevee, you have available, right? But the cool thing about Blender is that if I go up here to my shading properties, and I go to render pass, right now it says combine, and this is everything combined, which is what you see here in the window. But if I click here, I can actually access all these different render passes, and I can actually see them individually. So for example, if I go to normal, which is my pass for to see the actual normals on my textures, I'm gonna get this, right? And this one is actually pretty useful, and it's more useful if you don't have normals maps on your textures, because you get a more cleaner colors here. So for example, if I zoom in here, you can see that a little bit of the blue is sort of mixed in with the green here, right? And you get this because of the detail in the normal map. If I didn't have normals on these textures, it would be more a flat color. And what this does is it assigns a color to the faces that are facing in the same direction. And that is extremely useful because I can isolate faces that are facing in a specific direction, let's say facing up, and I could apply light to only those faces because the light is coming from the top. Or if the light is coming from the left, I can select all my red color faces, right? And just paint on those faces because those are the ones that are facing towards the light. So it's extremely it's very useful to use this this render pass. So that's normal. Let's say, for example, mist. Now, mist is one of the ones that I use the most. And mist is pretty much going to separate the value, the distance of the objects from the camera. And as you can see, the further the objects are, the lighter the value, right? And the cool thing about mist is that when you have it available or enabled here, if you go to your world properties here, you're going to get a mist pass option here. And here you can actually edit how much of this mist you want to reach. Let's say, for example, I only have 100 here. Right now, you can see that all the stuff that are 100 feet away from the camera are just too far away, and you will get this sort of white. So if I put this here in at 1,000, now I get more information further back from the camera. So depending on your scene, you're gonna have to sort of figure out what number is gonna work best. So as you can see, 650 is gonna not erase, but it's not gonna cover some of these far away buildings here. And so you're gonna have to play with the slider to see how much information do you need. Now the cool thing about this is you can actually have two. So for example, I'm gonna have one that looks just like this, where I'm gonna have a nice separation here in the foreground and midground. And then I'll get another one when I change this to get more of the background information here. So, you can have two of them with different types of information and value there. That's the mist pass. Diffuse light, I sometimes use a lot. This is going to depend on how much lighting you have on the scene. Environment will only cover the environment if you have any HDRI or any background images. Ambient occlusion, which is super useful. This will give you the information for your occlusions on your environment. And shadow is very important as well. However, it depends on how many lights you have on your scene. As you can see here, I have multiple spotlights, right? And I have a couple of sunlights here that are lighting the scene. However, let's go to, I'm gonna actually hide or disable some of these lights so you can actually see what's going on with the shadow here, because shadow is really cool render pass if you can use it properly. And the cool thing about it is that you can actually have a very graphic read of your lighting with just black and white information. And that way you can sort of composite and design your lighting to be pretty graphical and a graphic read if you need to. For example, if I just move this here, I can actually get a sort of an idea of how the lighting is. And I'm getting some artifacts here, but that's because I'm just moving it. But as you can see, I'm getting a pretty good read of where the light is hitting, where it's not hitting, and that way using this pass you can actually design the lighting however you need to. But in this case I have a lot of lighting going on, so it might not be as useful, but we can still use it somehow. And of course Combine has everything in there, but as you can see I have them all available here. And the trick for this is that if you go to your render settings here, what I do is like for the most part, I put OpenEXR multi-layer here option, and this is the file format that Blender is gonna save the render as. And you need to have this in order to get all of these render passes in one file, right? So if I do, for example, a PNG or a JPEG, whatever render pass I have active here is what's gonna be. And when you open it in Photoshop, you're only gonna have like one layer. However, if you have OpenEXR multi-layer, make sure that it's a multi-layer one, not the regular one, multi-layer. It's gonna put every single pass here in its own layer when you open it in Photoshop. We're gonna take a look at that in a second. But this is very useful because you will only have one file, and that file is going to have and include all these layers, and that way you have everything already. Now you can save all these by themselves. So let's say if I want the normal, I could definitely go to view, viewport render image, and that will render the image based on that render pass that I have already set up. And I can just go to image, save it, and save it individually. But then I'll have multiple files, and I have to deal with them individually and then import them into the main file, and so on and so forth. So so this, I'll get this image and go to save as, save it, etc., and that would just take longer, right? So I just do EXR multi-layer, and that way I have everything in one file, right? So once you're ready to render, you just render the image, save the file as an OpenEXR, and you do have to make sure that depending on the Photoshop version that you have, you either have to get an external plugin, which is free. You can just Google OpenEXR in Photoshop plugin, and you will get the file. But I think the latest Photoshop version, you can just download it from their servers, and it's completely free, and you can use it. But when you open it in Photoshop, then you will get this right here, right? So this is my EXR open here, render EXR. And as you can see here, I have all these layers here. And each layer is the render passes that I enable in Blender. And as you can see here, this is my ambient occlusion. It says AO here. This is my combine. This is like my beauty, pass everything together. Diffuse direct, environment, which we probably won't use. Gloss direct, this is my mist layer, my normals, shadow, and volume direct, right? Because I have a little bit of a volume in the scene. So this gives me a little bit of that effect and how it's related to my scene. But everything is one layer, and everything is ready to go. Okay, so normally what I do when I open this EXR, you can see this 32 bit, and it's an EXR file. What I normally do is just go straight to 16 bits. There's a lot of things that I cannot do at 32, and there's some things that I cannot do at 16, but they're very limited, but we'll just keep it at 16. And now I just save this as a PSD, and I'm just gonna render version 2. Let's just save that, just in case we already have a PSD file, and I just I already have that set up, so I can just save it automatically as I'm working the scene. Okay, now all these render passes, you can be as creative as you want on how to use them. There's really not a right or wrong way to use them. So this is, what I'm going to show you. This is just things that I've pretty much just experienced with, and how to use them, and things that I, with time I just, discover to create, different effects and stuff like that. So this is by no means the way to do it, but this is just my way of how I do things normally when I deal with this sort of file here. And so what I do is I gotta combine and I duplicate that, Control J, and just bring that to the bottom here. So I usually start from the bottom up, and depending on the render pass that I'm gonna be using, I don't need this one, so I can just delete it. I normally what I'm gonna do and what you're gonna see me do is I'm just gonna, let's say if I want to use my mist, I'm gonna duplicate that. So I keep the original one safe, and then I experiment with this one and do what I need to do with that one. So I'm gonna duplicate all these because I don't wanna. This is a very experimental phase for me, and this is the first thing that I do as soon as I open the render. I don't start painting right away. I normally do. You go back here, and this is like literally my whole process here. I'm gonna delete or hide everything, and this is my render here. I normally at the very beginning I do my color grading, and I do that mainly by using some of the render passes and some color balance and all that sort of, that sort of thing. But I want to do that right at the beginning, because once I have that sort of look and feel of the whole image as a whole, then I can go in and start painting and photo batching and doing all this stuff, and then I can go back to color grading and go back and forth. But at the beginning I want to experiment a little bit to get the sort of the look that I want and the feel and the mood that I'm looking for the image. Okay, so let me set up my Cintiq here and with my microphone. Okay, so one of the things that I like doing is saving selections, right? And saving selections is pretty crucial to time saving, right? So for example, now in this image here, I may not need that many, but there's some images that I do need specific selections that I know for a fact that I'm gonna be going back and forth with, and I want to make sure that I have this saved. That way I don't have to select them every single time I need them, right? So let's say, for example, I want to have a selection for this center sort of courtyard part of it, right? I can go to my mist here, and I'm actually gonna duplicate it. And I'm gonna go to my levels, and I'm actually going to play with the levels to sort of separate the area that I'm looking for, which is this area, right? And have a clear separation of black and white between these, right? So now I can actually control click my layer, which makes a selection of that layer. Go to my channels, create a new one, and paste. Actually, gotta copy that first. Let me go to my layer here, Control C for copy. Go to my alpha, Control V. And now I have this alpha on my channels here, right? And what this does is that if I control click here on my channels alpha, I'm going to select, depending on the values of this, it's going to make a selection. Now there's no grays here, right? There's a little bit of grays down here, but it doesn't matter. So right now it's going to be 100% here on the back and 0% of selection on the black. Now I could have this inverted. So right now, if I, for example, let me make a new layer here. If I control click my channel, just grab a color here, and I paint, you see it's only painting the back here, right? So let's say I want it to be the opposite. So let me go back. You can go to my alpha here, duplicate that, and I can just invert it. So now I have two. I have this one, which is white, my selection for the front, and this one for the opposite way, right? So if I go back to my layer and I control click the one that has the front here, I can actually paint or do whatever I need to do for just the front, right? So this is how I do my selections. Every time I know I need a certain area, I save it on my channels. Now the cool thing is if I go to my mist again, right? This is also, I can use this as a selection as well. So if I just use it the way it is right now, control click the layer, makes a selection. I copy, Control C, make a new alpha channel and paste that. Now I get my mist as a selection, right? And this is what it looks like. So if I, let's say, I want to have a gradient or a color, let's say this sort of bluish color coming from the back front in a matter of distance, right? I can just go to a new layer, right? And let's say I want to have this color here, right? And I want to sort of apply this from the back towards the front, similar to this, right? I can just control click my alpha. And in here, I'm going to put a mask on it using that selection, right? So now you can see that the blue is sort of applied more on the back, and as it goes closer to the camera, it gets lighter, or with more opacity. And maybe I can put this on a blender, on a layer blending mode here. Maybe something like this. Maybe I can make it a little bit darker. So maybe something like this. Right? So now this layer sort of applies sort of from the back forward. And I can do the same thing on the opposite direction. So let's say I want to make everything closer to the camera darker, and as it goes back into the distance, lighter. So maybe I can create a new layer. Let's just grab this color here. Now I want to put this on multiply just to make it darker, right? And now I can use the same alpha, this one, right? If I click here or control click here, go to my layer here on multiply, and I put a mask on it, it's going to apply the same way that it did this one here, the blue one. But what I can do is I go to the mask here and I invert it by pressing Control I. Right? So now this one is being applied the opposite direction. And I can always go to the mask and go to my levels, and I can adjust the levels of it just to see if I can just if I want it more, if I want it less, depending on what I'm looking for. Right? You can see how easily you can create with the mist pass some selections already that are going to be pretty useful as you work in the image here. Okay, so now so that's the mist layer. And the other way that you can use a mist layer, you can actually, let me use this one here. I want to actually work a little bit from the render. So I'm just gonna do a curves here. Just bring everything just a little bit darker here. I don't want this to be super bright. And I think I don't want to have this really bland white color in the back. So I'm just gonna put some blue back there. And I'm gonna create my mist. And as you know, with atmospheric perspective, everything that goes into the distance gets less contrast, right? So if we use the mist and we put it on lighten, right, you can already see that it sort of flattens out things as it goes back into the distance. Now, if I go to my hue and saturation, Control U, I can actually colorize this and make that darker. And as you can see, as it goes back, and I can play with the hue. Maybe I want like a lighter blue. Maybe a little bit darker, just so we can see a little bit of some information here in the back. Because if I go too bright, it sort of watches it out. Depending how misty you want to make it, right? You could go really, really light like this. Let's try that. Let's go really misty. Let's go a little bit less saturated. That should be okay, right? So now this on lighten is gonna sort of get rid of all the or reduce the amount of contrast that is further away from the background. Now I'm thinking that I maybe want to have this sort of like very misty, that you shouldn't be able to see really far away because of all the mist. And so I'm actually going to add another. I'm gonna duplicate this one, put that on the top, and I'm gonna put that on lightning as well. And the reason I duplicated that one because I have the mist as my mask here. I want to actually make that pretty bright. Maybe something like that. And now on this mask as well, I'm gonna go to my gradients, and I wanted to have it sort of like coming from the top and be less misty at the bottom. Just gonna click and drag here just to reduce some of that mist at the bottom here. That way we get this sort of effect here. And I could double this. So let's say if I want this top area to really disappear into the distance, and just do a new layer, maybe grab this color here, do that, right? And then I'll grab my control click my mist here, put that as a mask. Maybe circle through some of these blending modes here, just to kind of see what I get. Darker color seems pretty good. And I always do this. I always sort of circle through some of this. And I could go back to the mask, sort of play with the how much I want. Doesn't seem to be really doing that much, but that's okay. All right, so let's see how this one looks with this. Maybe I can keep this if I play with the just a little bit the values here of the mask. Maybe reduce the opacity just so it's not that much. Cool. And if I wanted to add more mist like behind here, just to separate my foreground from the background, I could do that as well. So I could maybe grab this color. Same thing. I'll just add a mask from that. And I would increase the mist here. And now on that mask, I just want it like on the bottom, so I'm just gonna get rid of the top here on the bottom. So now I have a sort of like a gradient mist at the ground level here. You can play with the color and how much intensity, all that. I'm gonna do a high contrast here. All right, so those are most of the ways that I use mist for the most part. Now let's go to some of these like difference. This might be too blown out, but sometimes what I do is when I duplicate it, I play with the levels just to see what sort of information I get. I go here, maybe I decrease the brightness of some of these. Right, and I get something like this. Maybe I can see what sort of happy accident I get with a blending mode. So I sort of circle through some of these. You know, maybe I could get something, maybe I don't. Sometimes I could get like a nice happy accident. And if I don't, you know, it's fine. You can just delete that and move to something else. All right. So another way is, another useful one is this volume sort of one. And you can do the same thing with the mist, but volume already has some color to it. And so sometimes you need that sort of wash of color over your whole image. And you know, you still want to keep that sort of separation of distance between the you know, between the camera and all that. But you know, if you put that online, you get that sort of effect, and maybe that's too much, so I can just decrease that a little bit and get that there. Now let's try with the shadow here. I'm gonna play with the, because I have a lot of lights, I have a lot of information that I may not need. So I'm trying to get some of these pockets of light in some of these areas, right? Maybe something like that. And I can actually put this on, let's put that on color Dutch. Go to my hue and saturation and colorize that just to give it a little bit of color and bring the lightness down just so it's not so blown out. And then maybe have like a warmer sort of yellowish light coming down. Now this is happening everywhere, but I don't want it to happen anywhere tonight. So I want it in just some key areas. I just want it in the midground here. So I'm gonna, on my channels here, this selection, put a mask there. So it doesn't happen in the background here. And then with a brush, I can actually just sort of paint out the areas that I don't want it at. Right? Maybe something like that. Right. So next, let's take a look at ambient occlusion. And ambient occlusion, I use them in two different ways. One of them is just like this, right? Where I want to enhance the occlusion of all these objects. I normally just put that on multiply, right? That way it gets rid of the white and applies the black as a multiply for darkness. And then I play with the levels, and I mostly want it on the foreground. So I'm mainly looking down here, right? I'm not really worried about the back here because I can erase that. I just want to enhance the occlusion on that area. So let's say this is good, right? Now we know that we only want it on the front here. I'm gonna grab this one, and I'm actually just gonna duplicate it and invert it. And I'm going to sort of play with the levels here. Remember, what's in light value is gonna be more or less opacity, right? So you're gonna see it more. And as it goes back into darkness, it's gonna be less and less. Now with this one, I control click my channel, make a mask, and now I get rid of the back here. So you can still see a little bit of it here, which is fine, not that far away. But now you can see that we get it really nice in the foreground here. That's ambient occlusion the way it is, right? Just like that. It's pretty straightforward. But the other way that I use it, which is probably my favorite, is I duplicate that. And if I actually invert the layer, so Control I, right? I get this sort of underlit sort of effect, which I think is super cool. Because if I bring this into, I put this, let's say, on either screen or lighting, right? I go to hue and saturation, and I colorize it. And let's bring it like a really warm color here. Just playing with the saturation. Let's say something like this, right? I'm actually looking at some of these faces that are sort of facing down and in the opposite direction of where the light's coming from. And I'm gonna get rid of all these ones in the back. So I'm just gonna use that same mask that I did for my ambient occlusion and do that there, right? And I'm getting this sort of effect here, right? In some of these areas that is gonna bring a really nice variation of lighting into my project, right? So if this is off, on and off, right? Now it might be too much, right? So let's try another blending mode here. This is lighting. Let's circle through. Now this is nice here. Difference, not that bad. I can increase that a little bit, right? And it might be too much here in the foreground, but I can just go back to my mask here instead of erase that just a little bit. Just a little bit. So now I got a little bit of a sort of variation of color where the light is not being hit, which I think is great, right? And you can actually use it as well as, let's say if I wanted to, let me duplicate this and let's put it on lightning, and let's bring the like the mask completely enable. I can actually use this to create sort of pockets of light in like windows and stuff like that. As you can see here, for example, there's like this little light coming from there. You can maybe bring this into screen. It might work better. But lightning seems pretty good. And you can always go back here and sort of increase that. But you don't want it to cover the actual wall. You want it coming from the window. And I think it's a good starting point to get some light coming from that window. Like for example here. So now I can bring on my mask, just paint everything black so it's completely erased. And I can paint back in the areas that I want that light coming inside here. Right, so if I just want it in this area, I'm just painting a little bit of white there. It's just a little bit, right? And now I can just literally just maybe duplicate that, maybe put that on screen, decrease the lightness, increase the saturation. Maybe you got some light coming from there. Just a little bit up there, right? So that's another effect that you can do with the inverted ambient occlusion version there. But this is, this is really nice because it just gives you that a little bit extra information there. And again, this is just a base for you to paint afterwards, right? So I'm not gonna leave this like this, but what I'm gonna do when I get into my painting phase is I'm actually gonna pick these colors, right, and paint there, because I already have that information, right? And so this is just giving me more options and more tools when I get to my painting phase to get that done. Now, lastly, let's go to my normals here. And again, my textures had a normal map, so that's why you get all these sort of variations here of different colors here. You can see like here, you get all these colors, but mostly it's just blue. But if you didn't have a normal map on your textures, it will be a flat color, so it will be a lot easier to make a selection, right? So let's say I want to, let's say there's like a huge light coming from the left. Or let's just say, for example, let me just sketch something out here really quickly so you can actually see it. Let's say, for example, there's a fire, a little fire here, some flames in here. And so this fire is going to throw some light into these faces here, right? Into these faces, right? And so instead of trying to, for example, trying to add that light in here, and painting that up, you can actually go to your normals and select based on that color, right? You can even save that selection. So if you know you're gonna go back at it, you can just click the make a new mask from selection, and then you get this, right? So you can always go back to it. And now I can go back to my painting layer. You don't have to worry about getting other areas because you already have that selection. right? So you can create directional face selections using the normals here. Another one is, for example, if I grab all these, let's say I grab all these blue ones, and I go to select similar, I create a new mask based on that. So let's take a look at that. So now I have a selection based on the faces that are facing sort of upwards. And so if I wanted to bring a, let's say like a ground texture, I'm just gonna grab some random texture here. Let's say I have something like this, or maybe even something like this, right? I probably wouldn't use this specific image, but just so you can see what I mean, I'm gonna use this bottom part here, right? So now I can actually apply this texture to only the top faces. So I control click my channel, click my mask, and now that texture is only on those areas, right? Now I have a little bit more control of where this sort of texture is placed. And I can always go back to my mask and, let's say I wanted to just grab a texture brush. If I wanted some grass like overlapping here, I can always go back here instead of paint that in. But I'm painting this on my mask here, sort of create this sort of grass sort of effect here. So it's not so blocky, right? And I get some overlapping as well, right? So with the color texture there, go back here, instead of paint back in, instead of a little bit of that grass going up here, just a little bit, just so that there's some overlap, right? But I get that from, from the normals and making a mask from that. I think, this is extremely powerful and time saving when I want to, do certain things as I'm working the image. And so, yeah, so that's mostly the ways that I use the render passes. Now, again, I'm sure there's hundreds of other ways. You can always play with inverting the actual render pass. Playing with the layer blending modes. And do this whole experiment and playing with the different things just to see what you can get. Now, I usually don't spend a lot of time because you could spend a whole day just experimenting and you never get something done. But with the amount of time that you have set up for this, you can really go crazy with all these different render passes and play with the sort of the way that you want your image to be created. But that's mostly the sort of the ways that I use the render passes. But yeah, I hope you guys liked it. Again, I'm gonna be releasing some more videos just explaining the things that I normally do on my everyday. But again, I'm gonna be releasing some full-on courses that are really, really in depth. They're gonna be over 10 hours of narrated content and just going through every single step of the way, and so you will get a lot more information. So please stay tuned to those, but if not, I will see you guys in the next video.